Good morning and welcome back to Advanced Composition with Professor Kent Lee. We have a lot to talk about today, a lot to cover. It's kind of dry stuff, but it's very important. It's very detail-oriented. We're going to talk about citation systems, and when I was in college, we were never really taught specifically how to cite. I kind of picked it up on my own in secondary school and in college. And I didn't know which system I was using back then. A couple of different ones. I didn't really know. It was probably the Chicago system, and there are different variations. We're going to look at different citation systems. Now again, depending on what your focus is in college, you're going to have to learn one or two different citation systems for different kinds of courses. And we'll talk about which ones are typically used in different kinds of fields. There are different kinds for different fields generally. So we will talk about this and we will, I'll first kind of review some key ideas and then I'll have you look at an example in the book. So you're going to need the book again for this session and the next section for citation systems, and also we'll talk a little bit about some of the really weird details of citation systems and maybe a little bit about finding sources. So, to review, we talked about plagiarism, and of course with everything online it's easy to detect plagiarism. Professors can tell, of course, when there's an obvious shift in the grammar and style of a student's paper, and of course it's a really dumb thing to do. There are no benefits to it. When you get found out, the penalties can be serious. So it's kind of like this. Yeah, it's not worth it. Now, if you are tempted to plagiarize because you're running out of time or you don't understand what you're doing in the class, sometimes students do that. They don't have enough time, they're rushed, or they just like, I don't understand this, I'll just copy something and turn it in. I don't understand really what we're talking about, I'll just copy something. Don't, because of course the professor will find you out, and it's better to talk to the professor and either ask for more time or get some help from the professor. If you're not understanding something, talk to your classmates and have them help you. They can maybe understand it because they've just learned it and it's kind of fresh in their minds. Or talk to your professor or somebody for help with the contents or the concepts that you're having to write about. Professors don't want to see you fail. They give writing assignments because they want you to learn. It's a learning task. They want you to learn from the assignments. They want you to find something and research it and write about it and learn from that. It's a learning exercise. They don't want you to fail. They want you to learn. So they don't want to see you fail because you plagiarized or did something really dumb. Now again, more often, it's not so much plagiarism that's the real problem. It's more often the problem that college students have is this. They get some sources and they try to cite them really faithfully. And they may even try to, paraphrase properly as best they can. But what they do is they go to a Google search and they get all the sources they can, as many sources as they can find, and they find something from sources and they just dump all of it in their paper when they don't need to. They're not really reading this stuff. They're not really learning. They're not really, as I say, engaging with the, mentally, intellectually engaging with the material. Their brains are not really reading and learning and digesting the material. They're just dumping information that they get from sources. And that's all it is in this information, it's not so much ideas. They're not really dealing with the ideas. They're not mentally, intellectually dealing with the concepts and learning from it. So even if they cite and even try to properly paraphrase things, you get this dump of information in the paper. So it's kind of what we call data trawling. Trawling refers to this kind of fishing where you scoop a big net along the bottom of the ocean and you pull it all into your boat and you go through it and like, oh, this is good, I'll keep that, throw that away, throw that back. So you grab just a bunch of stuff and you go through it and you dump a bunch in your paper. So your paper reads like an information dump. It's an info dump, there's no coherence, cohesion. You cite only what you cite what you need to, to develop your ideas or to provide evidence for your ideas, or something to take issue with, ideas that you want to disagree with and then counter with your own, things like that. That's what we do with sources. So you don't want a paper that reads like an information dump, and then a paper where you have like all of these citations and you don't really need them. So you have what I call citation bling. Do you know bling bling? That's a hip hop slang term for this heavy gold jewelry that hip hop singers wear. Why do they wear this heavy gold jewelry? To show off. Well, citation bling is when you dump a lot of citations into your document to show off. I got all of these sources. I got 36 sources in my paper. Do you need that for a short college essay? Maybe not. It's something you might do. Actually, you might have a lot of sources that you have actually read and meaningfully used in a paper in graduate school, like when you're writing a paper in a course for in your master's or PhD program. But those are going to be sources that you've actually dealt with. You've read them and digested them. In college, not likely. You get the sources you need. And of course, you paraphrase them. You change content words, nouns and verbs and adjectives, combine sentences, use subordinate clauses to background certain things and achieve a good flow of information. The subordinate clauses present reasons or examples or comparisons or present counterarguments. So-and-so claims, da-da-da, however, or although so-and-so claims, da-da-da, we, or I argue, well, this paper will argue, or just present your argument, although so-and-so have claimed that, da-da-da, the truth is blah, blah, blah. Okay. So that's paraphrasing and summarizing, and we looked at a paraphrasing exercise like this, where a lot of material like this might be really distilled down to this. And even this is a very long paraphrase or summary. Usually it's going to be maybe a sentence, half a sentence, maybe 2 sentences if it's really important ideas or information. In this case, it's a longer paraphrase because the writer is critiquing the research methods. You're not going to do that probably in college papers. Citation systems. So now we're going to look at citation systems and all the gory, bloody details. Please look at section 6.4 in the book. It's about pages 85 through 94. So I have different versions of the same section of a paper, about 2 paragraphs, using different citation systems. So, briefly, APA is used in social sciences. That includes, of course, psychology, sociology, also many areas of linguistics, especially more research-oriented and education-oriented areas of linguistics. Education, fields like that, they use the APA. It stands for American Psychological Association, but it's used around the world, not just in psychology. It's kind of like the standard for social science papers. MLA is used in literature studies, literary studies, and a few other related fields of humanities. Many other fields of humanities use the Chicago system, particularly the more formal Chicago system. You may have seen the more informal Chicago footnote system. And here we're going to look at the official Chicago system that uses in-text citations. Then in the book, we've got several systems you've never seen before. I'm sure these are used in science and engineering fields. And very finally, we've got an example of something used in the law field, legal research, called Blue Book. So you have these different systems. I want you to take some time to compare them. Take a lot of time. Discuss this with somebody. Look at these in detail. So you've got the in-text citations, that's in the text, within the paragraphs, when sources are cited. How are they cited? And you'll see some interesting differences here. Then look at the end references. Now in humanities, it's more often called works cited, maybe occasionally bibliography. In most fields, it's called the end references. So as you compare the style of in-text references between these systems, what differences do you notice? Why do you think that they are different? As you look at the end references between these different systems, what differences do you notice? And why do you think they are like that? Why are these things done in a certain way for social sciences and a different way in humanities and a different way in science and engineering fields? Why do you think they're different? So I want you to pause the video for quite a while. This is going to take a while. Pause for quite a while. Look in detail, because you've got a bunch of different systems. You've got about 10 different systems here to look at, compare. Compare all these details. Look, how much information about the source do you see? What's the order of the information? What's included in the in-text? What's left out? I want you to spend a lot of time looking at these and discussing these, the differences, and why do you think they are that way. So please pause the video for a good while and spend plenty of time discussing these, and we'll come back later. Okay, and we're back. The APA. One thing that the APA and MLA in Chicago have in common is, well, what do you notice? In the in-text citations, what do they have in common compared to the science systems? The science systems are really different. The social science and humanities systems, APA, Chicago, MLA, use parentheses. They are parenthetical systems. So these are parenthetical in-text references, parentheses. And you see the APA, you have, for example, either the author is mentioned in the sentence grammar, like Smith, 2008, found that, blah, blah, blah. Or you see here, for example, the author and date or year are both in parentheses, and they're not in the sentence grammar. So, for example, the individual factors. And then you see in parentheses the Gernsbacher, Kench, and so on. It's all in parentheses. And why? Well, that kind of backgrounds that information. Maybe it's not important to cite the actual author names in the sentence, directly in the sentence all the time. Many times that can be backgrounded. It's not so important, especially when you're citing a lot of sources like this. MLA is a little different. With the APA, you see the author and the year. And by the way, you see a comma after the author. So it's author, comma, year in APA. And that's how you can tell the difference between APA and Chicago. Anyway, the MLA, what do you see? You see the authors, or author and page number. And that's interesting. Why is that? You can include the page number if it's relevant. You would include the page number if it's relevant. If it's a quotation from that page, you have to cite the page number if it's a direct quotation. Otherwise, if the information is just from that page, you can cite the page number. If not, if the information is from the whole article, you can just cite the author for the in-text citation in MLA. Seems pretty easy. Why is that? Chicago, you can have author and year. And I don't have examples here, but it's also common to see author year and page number in the in-text citation. Again, if the page number is important, if it's right from that page, for example, you can use page numbers in Chicago. It's kind of more optional. First of all, let's think about these differences. Why are these different in this respect? Psychology, social sciences, education, research. You kind of care about the date. You certainly care about the author. And it's not that something is true because of a certain author says it. That's never the case in any academic field. It's not true because a certain famous author said so. No. But you care about the researchers. Who is the researcher or who's the scholar who wrote this? You kind of care about that. You want to see that, at least in parentheses, and the year. The year is kind of important. In a lot of social science research, there's kind of an expectation that you should have some sources from the past 5 years. You know, if it's a topic like this, you need to have some relevant recent research because things kind of change somewhat, not as quickly as in science, but things do change and you want some up-to-date research. And you also want a lot of sources that are probably in the past 20 years. It's common to have stuff in the past 20 years. You might have something older than that if it's a really important piece of research. So if you're in a social science or education field, dates kind of matter. And you want to see some variety in the dates, especially some research that's fairly up to date. And that's important. Now, MLA is used in literature. And in literature, are dates as important? Not really. It's not important enough to put it in the text usually. You could be citing a literary scholar who wrote something 2 years ago or 20 years ago or 200 years ago. It doesn't matter. You could be citing some dead Greek dude like Aristotle from centuries and centuries ago. Now, let's take that for example. You're not going to be quoting Aristotle in the original Greek. He wrote, centuries ago, thousands of years ago, but you're going to be using maybe an English translation, or it's maybe a book that was translated into English in 1950 and then republished again in 2010. Or it might be a German scholar who wrote something in 1850 and it was translated into English in 2010. Dates are less important in literature fields for these reasons. Something could be valid even though it's really old, especially when you're analyzing old pieces of literature. And of course, this is when you would cite, maybe novels and poems like you wouldn't in other fields. Chicago is used in a lot of humanities fields where dates and or page numbers might be somewhat important. It's kind of more like the APA system. They're kind of important. Although again in Chicago, if it's a humanities field, you may not expect necessarily a lot of recent stuff. It depends on your field. But dates are somewhat important and names are somewhat important in Chicago. Now you also see here a footnote version. It's a footnote style of Chicago. And that's different. Now that's something you might have learned in high school and you might have used it in a first year college paper, and that's probably fine. Footnotes and endnotes are kind of semi-formal. Semi means half. They're kind of semi-formal. They're not fully formal. The more formal systems are the Chicago Parenthetical or the APA or MLA. You might see the footnote style or endnotes. Footnotes are at the bottom of a page and endnotes are at the end of a chapter or at the end of a book. And you see that maybe in kind of professional books, when like an academic person writes a book for a popular audience. We talked about professional sources like that before, especially if it's more humanities or social science type of book. A book written by an expert but is for a more general audience, they will tend to use footnotes or endnotes, often following Chicago style footnotes. And those footnotes or endnotes are also used for providing extra comments or extra information or other things. So it's a less formal system, and you might see it in some really old academic journals still in some humanities fields, but usually today in humanities fields they will use Chicago Parenthetical, the formal Chicago parenthetical system, or some other system that's very similar. Sometimes in history they use Turabian, which is just like Chicago. So you might use the footnote or endnote style again for maybe an introductory course if you're writing a paper in an introductory college course or a first-year college course. But in a more advanced course, you probably want to use, if it's humanities, the Chicago parenthetical system, the more formal Chicago parenthetical system. If it's another kind of class, the APA or MLA or whatever is appropriate. Now let's look at the science and engineering examples. You see numbers in the text. You don't see parenthetical citations. You see numbers, but those are not footnotes. They sort of look like it, but those are used only for references, and those are at the end of the paper. Those numbers are only for references, not footnotes. For one reason, if you look at the end references, what order are they in? Usually in social sciences and sciences, if you're using Chicago APA MLA, your end references will be in alphabetical order according to the family name or last name of the first author of the paper or book or whatever, alphabetical order. In these engineering and science examples, are the end references in alphabetical order? Many times no. Sometimes they might be, but usually they are in citation order. So the first source that is cited is going to be the first reference here in the references. The second one cited in the text will be the second reference down below. Third one cited will be the third one down here. Now you might think, oh, that's confusing. How do you do that in a Word document? Well, scientists and engineers will use special software that will automatically do this for them. The end references might be in citation order, not alphabetical order. If you're in my class, you're probably in a social science or humanities field, and you should use a system where they're in alphabetical order. Anyway, why do you see numbers? Do you care about authors in science and engineering? No, it's irrelevant. Who did it? Who cares? The author is really, really not important in science and engineering fields. Has less status. And you might have a lot of research projects where there were 20 people participating or 100 people participating. That's too many names. So those are left out. So authors are really not important. Years are not so important because generally in science and especially in engineering, the expectation is most of your sources are going to be in the past 5 years. That's just the expectation because everything changes a lot in those fields, so most of your sources are going to be recent. So the dates don't matter so much because it's assumed they're recent. So dates don't matter. So that's quite different. Finally, at the end, the Blue Book style. This is a style that's used in law, legal research, and academic research in legal studies. And they look more like footnotes because not only do you see, here you just see sources, but if you open up a legal research journal for law studies, they will actually have other contents and comments and extra information in these footnotes. So they use a footnote system in law, and this is kind of unique to law. Why? Well, in a legal article, you need maybe footnotes to provide sources and maybe extra background information and extra commentary. You're going to cite a court case, and your footnote might provide extra background information about the court case or why the judges ruled in that way. And also the citations themselves. You're citing court cases and you're citing laws, government laws, and stuff like that, legal documents. The citations can be pretty long and complicated, and you need to provide some comments on them or background info, and it's complicated. So they use that. And it's interesting that the references use really an interesting font, like capital letters for titles. It's really different because you need to draw attention to that stuff, I guess.